Here's something we all know, but we don't think much about. Life is all about decision making, right? I mean, every day, multiple times a day. Sometimes we're sure, sometimes we're unsure, but in the end, we are where we are because of the decisions that we've made, right? I mean, your decisions along with your responses to other people's decisions, which are also decisions, they're about the only thing you can control in your life, which means that your decisions are how you control your life. Decisions are your steering wheel, your joystick, your trackpad, which means, and this is big, your decisions determine your story, the story of your life. Every single decision becomes a permanent part of our stories. And if that's the case, we should stop at every decision-making juncture and consider the story that we want to tell. Perhaps more compelling, we should consider the story we want told about us. And the good news is you get to decide, but you decide one decision at a time because you write the story of your life one decision at a time. This content will help you develop the discipline to pause and ask 5 questions that will result in better decisions and fewer regrets.
Well, it's the least I could do. You ever use that? Somebody, you do something for somebody and they respond positively to it and you just come back with it, well, hey, it's the least I could do. I think generally when we use it, what we mean is, it's just a simple, natural response that friendship requires. That's just what friends do. Well, a friend of mine, John Cleary, and I used to have an inside joke that kind of put a twist on that. When we used the phrase, it wasn't so much, hey, that's just what friends do. It was more like, well, it's the least I can do. Trust me, I've thought it over. I've considered all the possibilities. And the least inconvenient thing for me to do in this particular set of circumstances is still appear gracious, and still appear respectable, is to do this. It's the least I can do. And John and I would swap that back and forth with each other from time to time. And for us, it was a joke. We would have done anything for each other. But we would use that. It's the least I can do. What was a joke for John and I, I'm afraid too often is a way of life for a lot of people. You go through life and it's kind of like, what's the least I can do? In terms of what it takes to follow Jesus as Lord of life, I think there's a lot of people who think in terms of what's the least I can do and still be respectable. What's the bare minimum to be in, not out? What can to be considered a disciple and yet not a fanatic? I want to go there. What's the bare minimum? When considering God's will for my life, what can I get by with? Still go to heaven when I die. That kind of mentality. I think there's too many Christians possessed by this, what's the least I can do mentality. And then that mentality crosses over into the decisions that we make. And boy, oh boy, when it comes to decision making, which is the point of our series here, Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets, if we take the minimalist mindset in how we approach decisions that will shape our lives, decisions that become the story that we tell, that we live, and that will be told about ourselves, we begin to realize, man, a minimalist mindset is a dangerous place to be. One of my favorite collections on theology is Bill Watterson's comic series, Calvin and Hobbes. I hope you're familiar with Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin named after the Christian reformer, Hobbes named after the atheist philosopher, And the irony is that in the comic strip, it seems to be switched. Calvin has been described as, quote, a highly intelligent, though without any self-discipline or concentration, 6-year-old boy with a vivid imagination and a habit of getting into trouble and adventure. Don't you just love him? Aren't you glad you're not his school teacher? Oh my goodness. Hobbes is Calvin's stuffed tiger who comes alive in any comic frame that has Calvin and Hobbes in it. Without anyone else, Hobbes will always be a living creature. The moment some other human being, some other entity shows up in the comic strip, Hobbes is simply a stuffed tiger, okay? But Hobbes is Calvin's alter ego, kind of Calvin's conscience, who raises questions that annoy Calvin to death. You know, always that tension that brings attention, that calls for attention. Well, anyway, Calvin is that, Hobbes is that for Calvin. Well, one day they're sledding down the hill in the snow, so wintertime, and Calvin begins the conversation. He said, I've been good all day so far. To which Hobbes responds, Christmas is getting near, huh? You got it, Calvin says. And then he gets serious. I've been wondering, though, is it truly being good if the only reason I behave is so that I can get more loot for Christmas? That's a good thing to think about. He says, really, all I'm doing is saying that I can be bribed. Is that good enough? Do I have to really be good in my heart and spirit? In other words, do I really have to be good, or can I just act good? Hobbes wisely says, I suppose in your case, Santa will just have to take what he can get. To which Calvin responds, okay, so exactly how good do you think I have to act? Really good or just pretty good? Sounds a lot like, what's the least I can do? I don't think there are many of us that are quite as self-aware or brutally honest as Calvin, okay? And so I think for when we're dealing with that minimalist mindset, it may come out a little different. It may sound a little more like this. How close can I get to sin without sinning? You know, as a youth minister for years, long time ago, the kids in my youth group would ask that question. How far can we go on a date without going too far? It's, I want to go as far as I can, but I don't want to go too far. How close to bad can I get without being bad? How much can I indulge in addictive behavior without becoming addicted? How long can I neglect my family, my finances, my health, without feeling any negative effects? How far can I go without going too far? And it's dangerous, isn't it? It seeps in, doesn't it? It seems like it's human nature to kind of snuggle up to the edge of irresponsibility, disaster, embarrassment, to stay there as long as we dare, to get by as much as we can without becoming our own worst enemy, without being grounded or embarrassed or expelled or fired or kicked out of the house. The line between I'm still in control and oh my goodness, I am in so much trouble. That line gets it gets so blurry when we tend to choose to live right on the edge. I just want to remind us that living on the edge without much margin of error is a dangerous place to live. Don't take my word for it. Just ask Humpty Dumpty, right? Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. What was he thinking? He's an egg. You put an egg down, and what does it do? First thing it does is rolls. And has it ever, in your experience, rolled toward the backsplash? No. It always rolls toward the front edge. He was an egg. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. I want us to think precarious perches, okay? Here he is, sitting on the wall, getting out there on the edge of it. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. Wow. Is there anybody here that didn't see that coming already? Precarious perches, inevitable outcomes. It's just, there's this connection. And yet, it's always easier to see someone else flirting with disaster than it is to recognize it in ourselves. We can make some really dangerous decisions when we're working on how close we can get to the line, whatever that line has to be, that line between legal and illegal, that line between responsible and irresponsible, the line between moral and immoral, the line between ethical and unethical. If we're focused on trying to get to the line, we can have a lot of problems there. And I think the problem is that we're asking the wrong question to start with. The question of how close can I get to the line? What's the least I can do? Is there anything wrong with this? Is more often, how close is there anything wrong with, and man, it is so easy to imagine, not really, if that's the question that we're asking. The assumption is if it's not wrong, then it's all right. If it's not illegal, then it must be permissible. If it's not immoral, then it's acceptable. If it's not over the line, it's fine. But as a pastor, some 30-something years being a pastor and then still involved with people, I've looked back over the years and trying to help people get out of the messes that they've got themselves into. And over, I've heard some variety of this question: what's wrong with me wanting to? What's wrong with that? Well, it's so easy to answer, well, not anything really, if we ask the question of what's wrong with that. That's not the best question to ask, because asking the question, what's wrong with, tends to, in a real hurry, flow into a second question is, how in the world did I get into this? If we ask the wrong question. So this sermon series has been all about asking questions, better decisions, fewer regrets, but it's learning how to ask the right questions. One of the premises that we have is the fact that good questions lead to good decisions, or at least better decisions. All right. It can be argued that the decisions that we make are no better than the questions that we ask in making those decisions. So good questions will set us up to make better decisions. And what we need to do is to first ask the question. You know, and we've been looking at questions, but to ask the questions and then answer them honestly, which is not always easy to do, and then to act on the answers that we come up with. We can have a good idea of what we need to do, and we can settle in our brain, but if we never act on it, if we never get, this relationship really isn't all that good for me, and I know it's not, and I really need to get out of it, but we never break it off. or this particular situation, this particular place that I go to, it's living on the edge, and I realize it's not a healthy environment for me, but I still go back there, thinking I can handle it this time, maybe better. But if we will answer the questions honestly and act on them, then life will end up with better decisions and fewer regrets. Not perfect, not foolproof. We can make the best decisions in the world, and life in a broken, fallen world can still derail on us. But better decisions will mean fewer regrets for us and for the people who love us and depend on us. So anyway, the questions that we've been looking at from Andy Stanley are these. The integrity question is, am I being honest with myself, really? Starting off there, the second question we looked at, the legacy question, remembering that the decisions that we make become the story of our lives. What story do I want to tell? The outcome of this decision. What story do I want to tell, or do I want to be told about me? Last week we looked at question 3, which was the conscience question. Is there a tension that deserves my attention? When everything looks good on paper, when everyone is nodding in agreement, when it all, there's just, nothing seems wrong, and yet somehow deep down inside there's that little nagging, something's just not quite right. We need to stop and recognize that tension deserves our attention. We need to get curious. We need to explore a little more. We need to ask some more questions. Maybe we need to put things on hold. We need to take a second look. But this morning, what we're looking at is the maturity question. Remember the scripture passage that's kind of lying in the background of this whole series from Proverbs 27:12. The prudent see danger and they take refuge. The prudent, the wise, the mature, the folks that are able to connect the dots between certain things and consequences of actions. The prudent see danger ahead and take refuge. But the simple, the immature, keep going and pay the penalty. The maturity question asks this: what's the wise thing to do? It's not, is it wrong? But is it wise? When we're considering those options for a plan of action, it may be legal, it may be acceptable, it may be permissible, it may not be immoral, and still not be wise. We need to back off. Is this a wise decision? Let's pause for a moment. Think back in your life on one of those regrets. One of those, one of those moments that you wish you could go anything to go back and undo. Maybe it haunts you to this day. Think about that regret, and then think about before that. Okay? How did you get there? How did you get to the edge to which you eventually tumbled over the edge? More often than not, our greatest regrets are preceded by a series of unwise decisions. My experience. It's like it wasn't just one small mistake, but a series of unwise decisions. And then backing out is so hard, and so often so many people get hurt in the process. Oh, my. Let me just say I don't have time for that story this morning, okay? But the memory of it is still there. Oh. So hence is the importance of this question. What is the wise thing to do? The Apostle Paul would save us a whole lot of heartache and regret if we could just get a hold of what he said in Ephesians 5:15 and 16. He says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Paul is saying, don't be careless. Your environment is not a neutral environment. Another one of my favorite comic series, The Far Side. Okay, it's Barry Larson has to be a little twisted. Okay. But it was Humpty Dumpty. He had had his great fall, and the police had gathered and had conducted their investigation. And one of the officers comes up with the conclusion. He was pushed. The environment that we live in is not a neutral environment. We get out there to the edge, and we will have all kinds of help going over the edge if that's the kind of life that we're living. Lots of help. I remember in Regina, Saskatchewan, at the Sears store, they had what they call the bargain basement. It was all the returns from the province of Saskatchewan. Okay, 1.5 million people. But anyway, the returns would go, and they'd put them in the basement of the Sears store in Regina, in the bargain basement. And they had this escalator that would go down to the bargain basement. And it was like you could walk over to the escalator and, stare down there, is there anything down there for me? But once you took the first step, you didn't have to do anything else to go down into the bargain basement. The escalator would take you there. If for some reason you decided, I really don't need to be going down to the bargain basement because I don't know if I can control myself down there with all the bargains, and you decided to turn around on the escalator and make your way back up the escalator just to stay in the same spot, took a tremendous amount of energy. And to overcome the motion was even more energy. And if there was a crowd of other people coming down the escalator, you were sunk. We don't live in a neutral environment. First Peter would remind us, be on the alert, because you have an adversary, the devil, who goes about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Paul says the days are evil. The world system around us, the culture of our day, the gravitational pull of culture is there. We'll be dealing with it. And culture always says, no, not later. Culture always says more, not less. Culture says, no, that's not the line. The line's further on, somewhere further on. The culture always says the first step won't harm you. all the way down. Paul says the days are evil, but Paul also reminds us that there are opportunities to take advantage of. And if we are wise, we can take advantage of the opportunities that come our way. We can make good decisions. So I guess then the question is, how do we get wise? Well, other than being filled with God's Spirit, that's Ephesians 5 rolls into that. Be filled with God's Spirit. Being immersed in God's Word. Worship. I thank you for this morning's song. You know, it's all I did was praise. All I did was worship. All I did was bow down. There's something about that simple act of coming here on Sunday morning and worshiping God together that gets us connected with Him in such a way that He is able to let His truth come alive in us. His truth being Jesus and other things. But we get wise by all of these things. And I'm doing so well with the slides today. Now I'm lost on my paper. One of our core values at Brownwood Community Church is allow failure. So from time to time we feel the need to model it for you. Okay, so here we are. Okay, I found my place. I found my place. Oh. How do we get wise? Well, we can ask some questions. Very practically speaking, we can ask some questions. And here's Andy Stanley's expanded version of question number 4. I think it can be profoundly helpful. He says, in light of my past experiences, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? In light of my past experiences. Ever heard the saying, those who do not remember the past are doomed to repeat it? Okay, we've heard that. Those who don't pay attention to what got them in trouble yesterday are liable to end up in the same trouble tomorrow. Looking back, I don't want to live in the past. I want to be captured by the past. But it sure doesn't hurt me to learn from the past and let that equip me for the future. Back to my buddies, Calvin and Hobbes, okay? Back on solid ground here. One day they're in Calvin's wagon. They're approaching the precipice of this steep hill. And Calvin is ranting about how that life is all about luck. And how in his particular situation, his luck is always bad luck. Hobbes raises that question about whether or not our decisions have anything to do with the way things turn out. Or, that maybe our actions have consequences. And Calvin dismisses that idea right away. No way, that's stupid. Who are you, And he continues on toward the precipice of the hill. And they get right to the edge of the hill. And Hobbes says, I'm out of here, man. He hops off. Calvin starts down the hill, and it's not long he gets separated from his wagon. He's tumbling, he's falling, he's bouncing into things, and, finally ends up down at the bottom of the hill. And he calls back up to Hobbes, and he says, see, it's bad luck all the time. And Hobbes looks down and says, oh, in the pricker bushes, just like yesterday. Oh, my goodness. We can write off all these negative experiences of our past simply as bad luck, or we can decide maybe I could examine those experiences for clues about how my future can be a better future. In light of our past experiences, then in light of my current circumstances, life is seasonal. And you owe it to yourself and to the people that you love to take your current emotions and state of mind into account when making decisions. Saw a meme on Facebook the other day that claimed that 80% of arguments start because somebody's hungry. And I thought, I bet that 73% of all quotes that are made up on Facebook are made up on the spot. Okay. But then there's that Snickers commercial. It says, you're just not yourself when you're hungry. And oh man, some of the most ridiculous things there behind. I love Snickers. So it's, Snickers bars fixed a lot of things for me. But if that's true of hunger, then it's got to be true of other issues as well. Grief over loss of a loved one, a loss of a job, loss of certain connections, loss, a broken relationship, shock over bad news from the doctor for yourself or some member of your family, the betrayal of a friend. Maybe something as silly as your brother-in-law just got a new Ford F-150 4x4 King Ranch edition, and you're staring at your, 7-year-old Dodge Ram, and it just doesn't measure up. I mean, it may be that simple. But the thing to do is, in light of my current circumstances, are there things going on in my life right now that might impair my judgment? To just stop. Think about it. How can I compensate? Maybe I need to slow down. Maybe I need to put some decisions on hold. And then in light of my future hopes and dreams, and this one I think is probably the most important element of this story, of this question. Do you have some goals and aspirations for your life? What about your marriage? That relationship? What do you want that to be like? What about your family? Are things where you want them to be? Or do you have some plans out there where you want to go with this thing? What about your career? What about your finances? What about your kingdom involvement? How you want to be participating with God in this world and being part of what God is doing in the world around you? Do you have some aspirations for those kind of things? Do you have a vision for where you want to be 5, 10, 20 years down the road? Well, the question then with that would be, are the decisions and habits that you're making today going to move you in that direction or not? What's the trajectory of the decisions that you're making right now? Is it consistent with where you want to end up? 68 years old, not the oldest in the room. Okay, Randy. But close. Randy and I will tell you that life can be hard on dreams. Seems to be a headwind all the way. You talk about being over the hill. Ain't nothing over the hill, man. It's just a steeper climb. It's a lower gear, man. We would love this over the hill business, and it doesn't get there. You are never, ever, ever going to coast into your preferred destination. You're going to get there intentionally by the grace of God and by including Him in your life big time. And letting his plan and purpose for you, which is bigger and better than anything you could ever plan for yourself, become something that you honestly pursue on a day-to-day basis in your life. But it's going to take something persistent. How often have you watched other people make decisions that you knew were going to short-circuit their dreams? Don't write that story for yourself. Beware of the excuses. Let me hit this quick. You know the one, but I'm not hurting anyone? Well, maybe not yet. I can handle it. Maybe today. But what's going to happen tomorrow? Don't I deserve to be happy? Oh, God's got something far greater than happiness planned for you. And if you sit and it's all about my happiness, it's going to be so much more about your heartache. Well, there's no law against it. And then that one, God will forgive me. Yes, he will. Yes, he will. But those kind of excuses, let me just throw this up there real quick. Excuses lead us to that threshold of regret. And they abandon us there with no margin of error. So in light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? If we don't decide for ourselves, then the world is going to decide for us. And I want to suggest it's nothing but regrets. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Precarious purchase. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. Inevitable outcomes. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Disastrous consequences. Now, the good news is, the gospel is, and I want to say this particularly about anything in your past, but it's true also of anything in your future. What all the king's horses and all the king's men can't do, the king can do. When we surrender our lives to the king, he can reach back there and work redemptively in all of those broken world experiences and make something marvelous out of them. But going forward, do I want to give him just one disaster after another to work with? Or do I want to give him a life that's lined up with his plan and purpose for me? I think that's where we want to be. So, in light of your past experience, your current circumstances, and your future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing to do today in responding to Jesus?